Black Sabbath, what can we say? Hi, this is Mike from the Tales from Gjallar channel, the finest in Dungeons & Dragons sessions, Dungeons & Dragons reviews, and also some album reviews like we're doing today. Make sure to subscribe so you can keep informed of when new videos come out. You'll be delighted. Today, Black Sabbath albums, all 19 studio albums. You know, when I was growing up, I'd heard Iron Man on the radio, and I loved it, of course. Who doesn't? And looking through my father's record collection later, I was probably 10 or 11, and he had the We Sold Our Souls for Rock and Roll 2-album compilation. I listened to that and I was enchanted and hooked ever since. Big fan, so I've been listening to these albums for many, many years. And of course, I've seen other ranking videos on the on YouTube. Thought I'd throw my 2 cents into the cyberspace. Again, 19 studio albums by Black Sabbath, my favorite band of all time. Some people would say, well, what about Heaven and Hell, 2009 release, The Devil You Know? No, sorry, it's not Black Sabbath. To paraphrase Red from that 70s show, you gotta have rules. If we didn't have rules, we'd be still living in trees throwing crap at each other. 19 studio albums spanning a time from 1970 to 2013. You know, some people give Black Sabbath credit for inventing heavy metal or being the first metal band. That's arguable, but I guess if you had to pick a flashpoint for where heavy metal began, you couldn't pick a better spot than their 1970 release. So I guess you'd say Black Sabbath is probably more responsible than any band for the heavy metal music came out over the next 3 decades. So 19 studio albums, a little bit difficult to rank. There aren't too many that I don't like. There's something great about all of them. But here at Tales from Gjallar, we don't shrink from a challenge. We'll go ahead and rate them anyway. The 19th album, I guess you'd say my least favorite, and this is an album that's typically at the bottom of most listings, most rankings that I've seen. And that's, of course, 1995's Forbidden. I've heard people describe it as garbage or trash or awful. You know, if you want to hear garbage, listen to a rap album. If you want to hear trash, listen to a country music album. Compared to 99.9% of the recorded material in the history of mankind, this is a pretty friggin' good album. Go back and listen to Mel Torme doing scat jazz singing, and then come back and tell me how terrible this album is. So I'll get off my soapbox. Having said that, yeah, by Black Sabbath standards, this is generally subpar. And it's a little puzzling because it's a really good lineup. As fans are aware, of course you had Tony Iommi on guitar and the ubiquitous Jeff Nichols on keyboards. But Tony Martin, this was his last recording with the band, very good vocalist. Neil Murray of Whitesnake fame on bass, and of course the late great Cozy Powell on drums. This is of course the same lineup from the Tear album from 5 years prior. So it's a little puzzling why this album is a little bit subpar. A lot of people criticize the production. I guess Ernie C. as a producer is a little bit of an odd choice. But I don't think overall it sounds too bad. It's more the quality of the songs. And you can see numerous quotes from, you know, Iommi and others saying that they were really just going through the motions, kind of a chaotic time. I don't know, maybe that's true. I wasn't in the room, of course. I'm not a mind reader, but it does come off that way for a lot of the songs. Now, that said, there are some there's some things to like on this album. Illusions of Power, the leadoff track, that seems to get a lot of criticism. It is a very doomy song, but it doesn't really seem to go anywhere. Kind of directionless, and Ice-T does about a 20-second speech in the middle of that song. That seems to enrage people. I don't know why, and I don't know why Ice-T speaking is any worse than, you know, Orson Welles or Vincent Price or Sir Nigel Pimplewhip or whoever English accent guy they would have speaking here. It's fine. But yeah, it's not a particularly strong track. A couple that I do kind of enjoy Guilty as Hell. That's got a nice groove to it. The title track, Forbidden, is definitely worth a listen. You know, Rusty Angels, that almost has a hair metal or pop metal vibe to it. So there are some things to like, but overall, yeah, it's rightfully ranked at the low end of most rankings. For number 18, you know, I hate to pick on the mid-90s work of the group, but Cross Purposes from 1994. You know, Black Sabbath isn't alone. The mid to late 90s were a time when a lot of, I guess you'd say, the legacy hard rock and metal groups were were putting out probably their least successful, maybe the nadir of their creativeness. And Black Sabbath was no different. I mean, one looked no further than Judas Priest, Dio, Iron Maiden. Arguably their worst work was done in this time period, the mid to late 90s. And I would say Black Sabbath falls into that category as well. Cross purposes, this is Bobby Rondinelli's one appearance in Black Sabbath on the drums. Tony Martin puts in a pretty good vocal performance on this album. And I have to say, when I put this album in, the first few songs are actually rather strong. Eyewitness is a nice up-tempo number. Cross of Thorns is a very evocative song. Psychophobia has a big, bold, crunching riff to it. So the album starts off rather strong. Some of the rest of the tracks, though, Virtual Death, Dying for Love, one might wince when you hear those songs. Hand That Rocks the Cradle is a pretty good song. It has a very interesting vibe to it. Cardinal Sin is another kind of interesting song. It almost has a Led Zeppelin Cashmere feel to it with the keyboards that they employed here. Overall, compared to most of their catalog, it's a rather weak release. Having said that, it's Black Sabbath, and again, there's some things to like on this album. If you haven't listened to it in a while, I certainly urge you to revisit it. For number 17, I know a number of people will disagree with this, but I'm going Technical Ecstasy from 1976. This is, of course, their 7th studio release. Ozzy, of course, on vocals. Back when I was going through as a kid and buying the back catalog of the Black Sabbath albums, this was actually, I think this was the last one I had purchased. Because if you look at the album cover, it's kind of bizarre. The two robots or robotic creatures engaged in some sort of sex. Kind of an odd choice for an album cover. The songs, you'd never hear them on the radio. So I wasn't even sure it was a real Black Sabbath album for a while, but I did buy it later. Overall, it's kind of underwhelming. The song really sticks out for one I'm not a fan of is She's Gone. Hearing Ozzy complain about a woman is gone. There's a billion females in the world. Go get another one. Shut up. The rest of it, though, a lot of it isn't bad. Backstreet Kids, You Won't Change Me, Gypsy, they're okay. And that's my point on Technical Ecstasy. It's just okay. It's all right. That's actually not a horrible song, so I guess it's indicative of the overall strength of the album. If an acoustic number written or sung by Bill Ward is not the worst song on the album. One exception, Dirty Women. That's, of course, a really good one. I was a little surprised in I think 98 or 99 when I saw them on the reunion tour, and they had played this. And of course, back when they were on the 2013 tour, they played it as well. And it sounds very good in concert. The studio versions is pretty good too. Yeah, it does drag a little bit with the but it's a strong number. Overall, Rock and Roll Doctor. Okay, I get it. It's about drugs. Great, whatever. Overall, it's just not an album that really ever grabbed me. I don't dislike it. But generally, over the last, almost 40 years, the only time I would listen to it is when I was listening to just all the Black Sabbath albums. I know a lot of people have a much higher opinion of it than me, but gotta call them as I sees them. And so I'm going Technical Ecstasy is number 17. 16, from the same time period, going with Never Say Die. This, of course, was the last album Ozzy had recorded before leaving the first time when he was fired. Some criticisms of this, the production value or the overall sound. We have all heard the stories. They were producing, or they recorded this in Canada when it was very cold. Stories about them tearing out the carpet to try and get the sound a little better. It does sound like the band was, in relative disarray, substance abuse, and Ozzy was on his way out. But this one, I ranked it a little bit higher than Technical Ecstasy and some of the 90s work, is because I do really enjoy the first side. Never Say Die, the title track, is really good. I've always loved that. It's actually upbeat, which is kind of odd for Black Sabbath when you think of their usual subject matter. Johnny Blade's a really neat song. Has that sort of frenetic keyboard opening. Don Airey did the keyboards on this one, incidentally. Don Airey did about every keyboard on every album there for about a decade, I think. It seemed like he was always getting credit on these things. Junior's Ice is pretty good. Sabbath fans will remember that Ozzy had briefly left the band just prior to this coming out. And there's a version of another singer, Dave Walker, who I guess had been in earlier version of Fleetwood Mac and some other dumbass English blues, Savoy Brown or something like that. So that's a little interesting to hear. Different lyrics, of course, Junior's Eyes, but there's a live recording of that one could see. It was filmed for a TV show in Britain. The last song on the first side was Hard Road. And I always like that one. It has almost like a Beatlesque feel to it. Definitely something that maybe would have come out like a decade earlier. But overall, the first side of the album was pretty strong, I think. The second side was wow. What the heck happened on the second side? Shockwave, not so good. Although it does have very interesting solo by Iommi. Air Dance sounds out pretty good, and then then the piano and the strings come in and they're doing jazz. Over to You, not a favorite of mine. Breakout, then that's pretty rough. The saxophone, they're using a saxophone on a Black Sabbath album. Come on. And finally, Swinging the Chain. This is another one Bill Ward sang, where it was kind of folksy and charming on Technical Ecstasy. Here it's a little bit painful. His screams, it sounds like he's putting his hand on a hot stove. So this album for me is really a tale of two sides. The first side's really good. Second side, not a fan of at all. And most countdowns or rankings have these listed, near the bottom. I don't dislike it to the degree that some other people do. Like I said, I really enjoy half of it. I have it coming in at number 16. Kind of a weird album cover too. The pilots getting into a plane. I guess, I don't know what that means. 15. This one is a little bit harder for me to kind of rank, I guess. 13. The last one that came out by Sabbath in 2013, of course. A lot of people criticize this one as sounding almost like they were trying to sound too much like Black Sabbath, and I guess I see their point. A lot of the songs are kind of long, a lot of time changes, nothing original here. That said, I still enjoy it. I've listened to it dozens of times over the last 7-8 years since it's come out. Really glad they put it out. Whoever thought that we'd see another Black Sabbath studio album. On this one, of course, it's Ozzy, Tony Iommi, and Geezer Butler. Bill Ward wasn't able to participate, but the drummer they got for the studio recording, Brad Wilk, does a really good job, I think. I really like the first 3 songs on the album, Into the Beginning, God is Dead, and Loner. I think those are pretty good. Zeitgeist, that's very reminiscent, I would think, of Planet Caravan from 1970. The remainder of the album, though, I kind of just blended together. Damaged Soul, Dear Father. I couldn't tell you which one. Finally, I kind of got the hint of it, but I think the first 4 songs are really the strength here. Again, it's not a favorite of mine, and it's a little bit hard to rank because I've had so much less time to live with it, I guess, compared to their 70s output. But I'm sure glad they put it out. It'd be great if they put out another one. Not hopeful, but still a very worthwhile listen. 2013's 13. Number 14 on my ranking. Going back to the Tony Martin era, this is a Tyr. I've always pronounced it Tyr. Tyr. Sometimes this gets lumped in as an almost concept album. There are some, songs that have to deal with the, the Norse mythology, which is interesting. The album cover is kind of evocative of that. The, decorative border plus a sort of a gray overcast song. Really strong stuff on this. Tony Martin puts in another fine vocal performance. He's not rivaling Rob Halford or Dio, but he has a very strong voice, impressive range, a little bit of a rasp to his voice. Very effective, I thought. I was a fan of his work. I know a lot of people aren't, but I certainly enjoy it. There's a lot of good tracks on this. Anno Mundi, the album opener, aside from the bizarre opening, which sounds like a kid show opening, it's a really good song. Sabbath Stones, of course, great. One that if I had to pick a favorite on this one, The Lawmaker. It's heavy, it's a fast pace. Jerusalem's another good one. Overall, it's just a good, solid album. I would have liked to rank it higher, but then when you see all the other great Black Sabbath albums, it's hard to put it above that one. As I mentioned before, this is the same lineup of Iommi, Nichols, Martin, Neil Murray, and Cozy Powell that would appear on 95's Forbidden. So it's kind of interesting that group reunited intact for the last album. But Tyr, I think I got this one at a Circuit City in the late 90s. I didn't get it right when it came out. This, of course, was released in 1990. I think I bought it, like 2 for $6 or something like that with some other album. But so it turned out I got a lot of listening out of $3 or whatever I paid for it. It's too bad, I guess, as the Tony Martin albums didn't make a bigger splash with the public. But for those Sabbath fans who know it, are appreciative of this album, it's a good one. 13. I'm going with the very first album that Tony Martin had recorded with Sabbath. This is, of course, 1987's The Eternal Idol. The album cover should be a warning. Of course, the 2 models there, they were painted to look like a Rodin sculpture. And of course, they predictably wound up in the hospitals and the paint clogged their pores or something. So that's a good lesson for folks out there. If you don't know what you're doing, don't paint people. It's a little dangerous. There were some really fine moments on this album. The album opener, The Shining, that's one of my favorite 80s Black Sabbath songs. It's just gorgeously arranged, really strong. Ancient Warrior, Hard Life to Love. You know, you go down the list of the tracks on this album, and there's not really a weak track on there. What's kind of interesting about this, Tony Martin was a rather late addition to the group for this album. Ray Gillan, the late Ray Gillan, of course, was initially the singer, and the recordings of his work on it are available to hear, on the internet. And if you listen to him, Ray Gillan had I guess you maybe sang a little bit higher register, a little cleaner voice than Tony Martin's. I don't know that I prefer one or the other, but it's certainly interesting to hear both of them compared. Another good lineup is, of course, this was at a time when Sabbath had a virtual revolving door of personnel. But Bob Daisley, of course, of Ozzy and Rainbow notoriety, had taken the bass duties on this one. 87's The Eternal Idol. It didn't do particularly well sales-wise. I think it barely cracked the top 200 on the Billboard USA chart. But again, this is one of those that fans who took the time to listen to it like it. I'm no different. Good album. 12. Going with Black Sabbath featuring Tony Iommi. From 1986, Seventh Star. I remember when I bought this, I think I had $20 in my pocket, and I went to the record store because I wanted to get the Saxon album, Innocence Is No Excuse, that had come out the year before. I had missed it, and I happened to walk by and saw this one. Of course, I had to have it. So out of that $20, I think I paid like $16 for those two albums, and I still had $2 for a pack of Marlboros and $2 to put in my gas tank so I could get to work and back. Boy, those days are gone, huh? I've always liked this album a lot. This is another case where I kind of would have liked to rank it higher, but there's so many great Sabbath albums. This one is the one appearance of Glenn Hughes on vocals for Black Sabbath. Eric Singer, who was later to go on to Kiss, was the drummer on this one. Some really strong tracks on this. In for the Kill, the album opener, just a jackhammering opener. No Stranger to Love. They made a video for this and a single. It's kind of a ballad. Living on the Streets, I'm No Stranger to Love. That just conjures up images of like unwashed street people having sex. I'm not into that. Not a fan of that song. Turn to Stone, another rip snorter of a song. That's a good one. Always like the sort of the epic sounding Seventh Star title track. Danger Zone. That's just a really good hard rock, maybe a little bit of a metal edge to it. Really good song. I remember seeing the band on the tour here in the Detroit area. They're playing Cobo Arena. They had Wasp opening up. It was one of the few times where Glenn, I forget the exact date, but he played a limited number of shows. Glenn Hughes did as the singer before he was forced to leave and Ray Gillan took over. But we actually saw Glenn Hughes. It was in March of 1986. It was a good concert, but you could see him, he was kind of coughing and forgot some lyrics, I think, here and there. There may have been some drug use in that period of the band. This was a surprisingly good album, I thought. You always hear people talk about, it was supposed to be a Tony Iommi solo project. Well, whether it was Tony Iommi or Black Sabbath, it didn't matter much to me. I enjoyed the album a lot, and still do to this day. Danger Zone, In for the Kill, Seventh Star, Turn to Stone. Good stuff. Good stuff. That's my number 12. Number 11. Another Tony Martin era. This is, of course, 1989's Headless Cross. This is a lot of people think this is the strongest of the Tony Martin era Sabbath albums, and I agree with that. It's a very strong release. It came at a time after The Eternal Idol. Tony Iommi really thought he needed to make a splash with the next one. He recruited the great Cozy Powell on drums. And they put out a pretty darn good album. I was always impressed with this one. There's, I guess, only 7 songs on it, which is a little bit thin for, the 1989 when CDs were coming out. It was 8 tracks, The Gates of Hell is an opening. Lyrically, Tony Martin, I guess, was the main lyricist on this, and they went kind of overboard on the lyrics. I mean, there was Satan, Satan, Devil, Satan, Satan, a little too much of that probably. But really strong tracks. The title track's just a fabulous song. Songs like Devil and Daughter. I always loved Killing the Spirit World. That's very catchy song. Black Moon, Good stuff. Again, this album probably wouldn't be anyone's top, favorite Black Sabbath of all time, but I think most Black Sabbath fans respect the work that they put on this album. I wouldn't say it's a lost masterpiece or anything, but it's definitely a worthwhile listen. Very strong album. The top 10 was, of course, very difficult to go through. Whereas I liked a lot of these albums, the top 10, I just love every one of them. But you got to pick something. It's kind of like picking your kids. What do? Well, you tell them honestly which one it is. I'm kidding. Love you all, girls. Black Sabbath Dehumanizer from 1992. This is, of course, when Dio had rejoined the band for this one album, as did Vinny Appice. A lot of people label this as their heaviest album, and I wouldn't disagree with it. Just some pounding riffs on this album. Favorites of mine, Computer God, Time Machine. Sins of the Father is one I never really hear people talking about, but I really enjoy the way the second half of that song, just kind of picks up. I recall we had seen him on this tour. Danzig, I believe, was opening up, and a buddy of mine, for some reason, threw a t-shirt on stage and actually hit Iommi in the back. He probably didn't even feel it, but yeah. This one, I think for some people it suffers in comparison to the other two albums Dio cut with the band, Mob Rules and Heaven and Hell. And yeah, I agree. Maybe it's not as great as those two, but it's certainly worth a listen. Dehumanizer. I always liked the kind of the over-the-top album cover too. Sort of a robot computer god, I guess you'd say. Good album. Unfortunately, that lineup wouldn't last long. Dio, of course, went back to his own solo group, and Black Sabbath was back with Tony Martin. At least they were long enough to give us this album, and then, of course, the same lineup reunited, 15, 16 years later to give us the Heaven and Hell stuff. Number 9, yeah, I know a lot of people would rate this a lot higher. I kind of wanted to, but it's the very first album from Black Sabbath, the 1970 debut. What a great album cover, isn't it? The creepy lady. You don't know what she is. Is she a witch? Is she a ghost? Does she have jaundice? We don't know. And standing in sort of a creepy background, you didn't know if it was a chapel. I guess it turns out it's a mill. But yeah, great album cover. That's kind of one of the things you like about Black Sabbath was, they outside of Headless Cross, they weren't singing about devil, Satan, Satan this or devil that very often. But just that layer of just flirting with the occult a little bit. And this kind of fits in nicely to that. A little creepy. The reason I rated this lower than some of the other ones, and I'm sure lower than a lot of people, look, I fully acknowledge the first side of this album is just jammed with classics. Black Sabbath, The Wizard, NIB. Even Behind the Wall of Sleep, good track. The other ones are just epic, all-time classics. I get that. Second side, never too much of a fan of it. It's filled with sort of unspectacular guitar playing, and yeah, I get the Sleeping Village intros pretty, it's kind of neat, kind of haunting sounding. The Warning, just not a fan, so again, kind of like Never Say Die, it's kind of like a tale of two sides for me. Love the first side, never a big fan of the second. Some, I guess, in Europe, and some editions of this, you get another single that they had put out just prior to this album coming out, I think in '69. Evil Woman, that's included in this. Doesn't really help it for me much. Not a big fan of that, but again, I get it. First side, loaded with classics. I just can't rate it higher because of the second side. So I hope you'll understand. Number 8 is another one that I think a lot of people might disagree with me with and rate it maybe lower than I am. And that's 1983's Born Again. I love this album. I love it from the second I got it. I believe I got it as a birthday present for my 15th birthday. And yeah, I know. The album cover is kind of crazy, much derided. The production, the overall sound is screechy. But beyond that, beyond those warts, I just love the album. I mean, the whole album is just kind of creepy to me, trashed, Stonehenge, disturbing the priest. I was like that. He's not killing the priest. He's not assaulting the priest. They're just disturbing him. See, just hinting at naughtiness. Zero the Hero, some of the most bizarre lyrics, but that's a great song. Some people have compared the riff in that to Guns N' Roses' Paradise City. I don't know if they stole it from them or not, but there's a similarity there, I guess. Kind of bizarre video for Trashed and Digital Bitch. Born Again. I love the title track, the slow, plodding, distorted guitar sound on that. And it contains the lyric, "Gray and plastic retards floating in circles." What a weird thing to say. That just really stuck out to me. I love the album though, overall. Hotline, just such a heavy song. Keep It Warm, great album closer. I've just loved this album since it came out. Again, it's one of those I wish could rate higher, but there's so many great Sabbath albums. Yeah, so again, this album seems to be kind of fall into the love or hate category for a lot of people. I obviously am going to love it. I'll go to my grave loving this album. So, Black Sabbath, Born Again, number 8. For 7, I Volume 4. I rate this maybe a little lower than some people. So a lot of people have said this is their favorite album of all time. I love all these albums, and trying to rank them is difficult. And do I really love 9 that much more than 6? No, but we got to rank them. It has to be done. So Volume 4, some really good stuff on there. One thing I guess, if you listen to the Black Sabbath albums in order and sequence, this is the first album where Black Sabbath fully did the production themselves. Their manager, Patrick Meehan, I guess, was credited too, but doesn't sound like he did a whole lot. So this was really the first album where Black Sabbath was in charge of the production, unlike the Roger Bain produced first 3 albums. And one thing you notice, or at least I notice, on the first 3 is Geezer Butler's bass is so prominent and such an integral part of the sound. I think it takes a little, toned down a little bit on Volume 4. And I think that's too bad, because I really enjoyed the sound of those first 3 albums. This one is a little bit more of a, I don't know if you call it a minimalist approach, but it's maybe a stripped down production. There's great stuff on here. Wheels of Confusion, Tomorrow's Dream. I always loved that one. It's a kind of a brief, you'd hear it on the radio very infrequently, but it's a really good song. Changes, never need to hear that song again in my life. Just the piano, the mournful, FX. It's kind of a waste of time, Supernaut, though, the closer of the first side of the album, that's such a great song. That might be like a top 5 song for me of all time. I just love that riff. It's the sort of the odd breakdown in the middle of the song. And then the other side is just packed with good stuff too. Snowblind, which I heard might have been about cocaine. I can't verify that, but I'll work on that. Cornucopia with its just muscular riff that is just bruising. Laguna Sunrise, I always kind of liked the, Iommi would seem to spring, I shouldn't say just Iommi, but he seemed to be the guitarist and most responsible for these sort of shorter musical interludes. That was like Laguna Sunrise, kind of like Fluff Off and, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. I don't mind when they put something like that in there. St. Vitus Dance, that's kind of a quirky song, almost a folk feel to it, but I've always really liked that. And of course, Under the Sun's a great album closer. So, Volume 4, it has a few warts, mainly changes and FX, but yeah, great album. What can you say? It's another classic in a parade of classics by a great band. Number 6, I'm going with Sabotage from 75. Of course, fans will know Sabotage named that because they were, seemingly under assault at the time, legally speaking, from making the album. There's some absolutely classics on here, some heavy stuff. Most people would agree it's heavier than their preceding album, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Probably consciously so. Opens up with A Hole in the Sky, just a heavy, great opener. After a little acoustic interlude, goes into Symptom of the Universe. Who doesn't love Symptom of the Universe? I mean, some people have said that might have been like maybe the first thrash metal. I don't think they were going for that, but it's certainly fast-paced, heavy. Not crazy about the second half of that song, though. Kind of in the sense it kind of reminds me of Derek and the Dominoes' Layla. You got a great riff, a great song, and then they go off and do something else for the second half. And they're doing, bongos and acoustic music I could live without the second half of Symptom of the Universe, but in no way tarnishes the magnificence of the actual beginning of the song. Megalomania, I don't know if you call it a deep track, but that's a favorite of a lot of Black Sabbath sounds. It's just fiendish sounding, the distorted guitars, the sinister lyrics. That's just a great song. And the second side, Thrill of It All, another good one. I like their use of synthesizers on this. Sometimes, bands get a little crazy with the keyboards or synthesizers, but here it really adds to it, really enhances the song. Super Czar, you recall me saying I kind of like those little musical interludes that they would sprinkle in here and there. Not so much a fan of Super Czar. It just kind of goes along. They kind of went over the top with this one, I think. The vocals, the strings, and it's almost 5 minutes long, just keeps going and going and going. So not really a fan of that one. Am I Going Insane Radio? I guess that's, they get that title from, that Cockney rhyming scheme, radio, rental, mental. So radio is a code word for being crazy or mental. Yeah, that's quirky, kind of a fun song. I could live without it. But the last song on the album, The Writ, that's really the centerpiece, along with the Symptom of the Universe for me. Is just, that's such a great song. The slow, ominous bass line of Geezer Butler. It's a great song. So love this album. Terrible album cover, though. Terrible album cover. Not that that matters for the music. Yeah, Bill Ward, I guess, was so plastered he had to borrow his wife or girlfriend's leggings or something like that. So explaining why he has these bright red things on. Not the best album cover. They doubled down and showed their rear ends on the other one. Not necessary, but yeah, I've always liked Sabotage. Great album. I guess you could say in some ways that was like the last of the classic Ozzy album that he did in this first run with Sabbath. After that, you know, they went into Technical Ecstasy, which was definitely a step back in the heaviness and style change from what it had been. Yeah, Sabotage, even though it's maybe the end of an era, it's a heck of an era. I mean, I don't think too many bands could put together 6 albums like Sabbath did from 1970 to 75. So on to my top 5. I'm going Mob Rules for number 5. I am a huge Ronnie James Dio fan, so I think maybe I would rate these, maybe some of his albums a little bit higher than some other Sabbath fans. Mob Rules, I think, is just a wonderful album, obviously, or I wouldn't rated it so highly. I think sometimes it suffers in people's minds when compared to Heaven and Hell. I think most people would say it's not as good as Heaven and Hell, and that's true. I obviously am in that same camp, but there's no denying the excellence of this album. You know, it starts off with Turn Up the Night, just a galloping opener, really grabs your attention. Dio, and he took this over into his own band. I like the way he kind of like, there was always a good up-tempo, high-energy album opener, like Neon Nights on Heaven and Hell, like Turn Up the Night. If you go into his solo career, Stand Up and Shout on Holy Diver, We Rock, King of Rock and Roll on Sacred Heart. You know, he's got, I don't know if it was a conscious habit, but I always liked that tactic. If indeed it was a tactic. Love Turn Up the Night. Voodoo, another good song. I'm not crazy about the lyrics sometimes. Bring me your children, they'll burn. Cut it out, Dio. No need for that. Seventh Son. Not doing a Maiden, idiot. Sign of the Southern Cross. That's a great, 7-8 minute song. So sinister sounding. It's one of my favorite songs featuring Dio's contradictory lyrics. Somewhere, nowhere, all. He loved doing that. E5150, you know, it's a little introduction to the title track, Mob Rules. E5150, just most of us know that's just E and then the Roman numerals for VIL, so evil. Very clever, guys. The second side, though, Country Girl. I always liked that, kind of a good, solid, hard rock. Of course, only Dio could turn the lyrics into something about an otherworldly succubus stealing your soul or something like that. But it's a good one. You know, I always liked Over and Over, and Falling Off the Edge of the World was kind of a neat epic sounding, you know, the whole swords and sorcery type fantasy lyrics he was noted for, really evident on that song. And years later when, you know, me and my friends saw Heaven and Hell performing a lot of these songs, it was really neat to hear some of these songs live, you know, like Falling Off the Edge of the World. So I was just delighted we got a chance to see those in our lifetime. Didn't think we would, you know, 20 years ago. So Mob Rules, you know, some versions, you know, the title track was actually used in the movie Heavy Metal, although it's a different version. It was recorded at a different place using different instruments, so the sound's a bit different. Either version though is a heck of a good song in my book. Great album cover too. I don't know about the technical artwork itself, but I don't know. Looks like these chaps, I don't know. I don't want to be strung up on that thing. So very menacing. Number 4. Top 4 for me is pretty hard to I guess rank. But for number 4, I'm going with Sabbath Bloody Sabbath from 73. Great album cover, wasn't it? A guy being tormented by female demonesses or something like that. And very sinister, a 666 in the bedpost. This one was, I guess this one, you know, from what I've read, this one was the first album that Sabbath actually, like, the critics liked, or began to like, or didn't hate at least. You know, a lot of the earlier work was derided as just being, you know, like Cream-like or something like that. But, you know, these are the same, you know, critics who loved Lou Reed and the Pretenders and garbage like that. This was one of my favorites. This was actually the first album I bought with my paper route money after I'd kind of go listen through my father's collection of the compilation album. Yeah, I was, of course, enchanted and remain so to this day. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, such a great, you know, it's the title track and the album opener. I love the primal sort of beat it has in it. It's a great song. It's been described, I guess, as the riff that saved Black Sabbath as they were working on this album and having a bit of writer's block. I guess Iommi came up with that riff, and the other guys were rejuvenated, and they gave us this fabulous album. National Acrobat, I've always liked that one. It's so mournful, the song. Fluff, nice musical piece. And then Sabracadabra. Sabracadabra kind of has to me, in my ears anyway, sort of a southern rock feel. The second side is just as great as the first. Killing Yourself to Live, I was like, Who Are You? But that's a kind of a creepy song, you know, Ozzy and Geezer playing the synthesizers and, you know, questioning the creator type vibe. Great song though. Looking for Today, another good one. Spiral Architect, looking back, that might be my favorite song on the album. And when I saw him in the reunion tour in the 90s, I was just delighted to hear that. But I was always kind of thinking, like, how would that sound live, you know, because the string arrangement seemed to be kind of integral to it. But it just came off beautifully in concert. Yeah, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. Can't say enough about this one. Again, I kind of would have liked to rate it higher, but so many great Sabbath albums. But this has long been one of my favorites. Yeah, on the other side, another nice picture of maybe the same guy with mourners around his bed. Who knows? Yeah, great album, great cover, great everything on that one. Don't have anything bad to say about that album. For my number 3, going with their third album from 71, Master of Reality. A lot of people say this is kind of where doom metal started, or stoner metal. Yeah, that's probably true. Although I can't believe that someone at Black Sabbath wasn't around, someone else would have invented something similar. But hey, Sabbath did it first, so whatever. Sweet Leaf, great album opener. It's a very slow pace, of course, and has a famous Sabbath time change in it. I believe it's Iommi hacking into the microphone right at the beginning of the song. After Forever, a great song. I love Geezer's bass work in that, and Bill Ward's drumming is just superb on this too. You know, when you think of Black Sabbath this time, a lot of people not fans of the band per se, you know, they're aware of Ozzy's kind of eerie voice and Iommi's tuned down guitar sound, but Geezer and Bill Ward are just one of the great rhythm sections of all time. I don't have to tell Sabbath fans that. And of course, Children of the Grave, maybe my all-time favorite song by Sabbath. I've loved that song. Remember the end? Boy, that's creepy, isn't it? That kind of feedback, and it was very creepy. And the second side, Lord of this World and Into the Void, 2 other great songs. Great album. Solitude, I'm not a huge fan of, but it's not bad. It kind of changes the tempo of the album from punishing riffs to a more acoustic sound, some flute by Iommi. Great song. I know a lot of people would pick that as their favorite album, and I wouldn't argue too much with them. So the top 2, this was kind of difficult for me, as a lot of these rankings were. I'm going with their second album, the second one from 1970 also, Paranoid. Yeah, bad album cover, we all know that. I mean, the first side has War Pigs, Paranoid, and Iron Man. Plus the Haunting Planet Caravan. That's got to be one of the great album sides of all time. And there's great stuff on the second side too. Love Electric Funeral, such a heavy dirge-like song. Hand of Doom, I guess about drug abuse, particularly in some veterans. That's a really good song. Another one of my all-time favorites is Fairy Wear Boots. Love that song. Rat Salad, you know, it's kind of like sort of a jazzy musical number I'm not too fond of, but the rest of the album is just absolute fabulous. Like I said, when you have an album, particularly one album side with War Pigs, Paranoid, and Iron Man, it's an all-time classic. Can't say enough good things. Yeah, I know we've all heard these songs a gabillion times, but the reason we've heard them a gabillion times is because they're phenomenal. So, Paranoid, my number 2, of course, leaving. My top pick for Black Sabbath's greatest album of all time is Heaven and Hell. I am an unapologetic Ronnie James Dio fan. He's my favorite performer. And in Black Sabbath, my favorite band. How could this not be my favorite? Neon Nights, one of the great album openers of all time. And that was right about the time in 1980. I was just getting the Dungeons and Dragons and Dio's sort of fantasy lyrics of, you know, dragons, rings, and all that. That was right up my alley. The Mystical Children of the Sea, another all-time classic. Love Lady Evil, Geezer's opening bass. I just love a good Geezer bass opening. Heaven and Hell, you know, what do you say? That's one of the great songs of all time. Wishing Well, Die Young, and Walk Away. I mean, that Heaven and Hell is one of the only albums, one of the very few albums I can honestly say I love every second from the very opening to the very finish. There's in my opinion, not a weak moment on it. And for that reason, that's my number 1, Heaven and Hell. Of course, people are going to disagree. We all hear these things differently, different experiences with them. But point is, we're Black Sabbath fans. They've given us just a mountain of great material over the years. So, hope you've enjoyed my ranking. Thank you for watching. I just got a text, and yeah, it's Tony Iommi. I guess Iommi wants you to subscribe to Tales of Gjallar and give us a like on that, where you'll be kept up on upcoming Dungeons & Dragons, metal rankings, all sorts of fine videos. And a recommendation for a deep track that you'd never hear it on the radio. I did mention it briefly. Eternal Idol's The Shining. It's kind of on an album that was largely discounted by metal fans. You know, in the mid to late 80s, I think, in my opinion, you know, metal sort of diverge. You know, a lot of bands were becoming popular in the thrash genre. A lot of them went sort of more in a hair or pop metal. So bands like Black Sabbath, I think, kind of suffered a little bit and were seen as passé at this time. That's a very solid song that I think most people would have overlooked. So that would be my recommendation as a gem that needs rediscovering. So put your own ranking or what you thought about mine in the comments, and we'll certainly look them over.